Shadow Hack. Chapter 981, Meeting City Master Xiao again. Li Yunmiu kept coldly watching Xiaorong lying in front of him. At that moment, he had already added Xiaorong's name to the list of people that he needed to kill. A trifling ant dares to provoke me, die. Li Yunmiu didn't intend to give an opportunity for Xiaorong to do anything and fully unleashed his strength. His outrageous presence even made the onlookers feel an indescribable pressure. They had no idea from where the powerful young man standing in front of them had come. Based on his strength, even City Master Xiao might not be his opponent. All the people in the surroundings began to slowly move outwards. The closer they were to Li Yunmiu, the harder it was to breathe, and they were also worried that they might be implicated in the battle. They hadn't seen Li Yunmiu before, but based on the powerful pressure coming from his body and the fact that he had sent a true immortal Xiaorong flying with one move, his strength could be clearly imagined. At that moment, Li Yunmiu began to circulate the dark energy in his body. During the long period when he had been cultivating under Heavenly Emperor Ryukyu, he had never used dark energy. Once it appeared, it instantly wrapped around Xiaorong. Under everyone's dumbstruck gaze, he was raised in the air from the ground. Just when Li Yunmiu was about to kill him, a voice obstructed him. "Stay your hand." A figure quickly rushed in from a distance. The owner of the voice was Xiaorong's father, City Master Xiao. Li Yunmiu stopped in the middle of his move and looked at City Master Xiao with a faint smile on his face. Li Yunmiu had thought to go and find him later, but who would have expected that the man would come rushing over himself? When Li Yunmiu looked at his nervous expression and at Xiaorong wrapped in dark energy, a memory clicked into place. He suddenly recalled a person who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. He had dared to provoke him and tried to fight with him over the solitary ignition sword in the Yin Imperial Palace. City Master Xiao saw that his son's life was in Li Yunmiu's hands at that moment, and based on the smiling face, the situation was very bad. It was quite likely that his son would lose his life. City Master Xiao carefully observed Li Yunmiu and all of a sudden recalled his identity. When he had opened the Yin Imperial Palace, almost all of the rogue young talents had been offered as a blood sacrifice to initiate the large spell outside Yin Imperial Palace. Li Yunmiu was one of the few rogue cultivators who hadn't rushed forward, so City Master Xiao had paid special attention toward him. City Master Xiao remembered that Li Yunmiu was only a tribulation passing stage cultivator at that time, while his son was a true immortal, so how could Li Yunmiu capture him? Could it be that he had also obtained some sort of opportunity in the Yin Imperial Palace? At that moment, City Master Xiao was pale. Regardless of what sort of opportunity Li Yunmiu had obtained, he definitely wouldn't let him leave alive. It was not only because Li Yunmiu had dared to attack his son, but even more so because he sensed a great amount of pressure coming from him. The most urgent matter, however, was to rescue his son. City Master Xiao cupped his hands towards Li Yunmiu. He didn't know Li Yunmiu's aim, but he knew that his son wouldn't be able to hold on for long. "Dao friend, I don't know what sort of grievances and grudges exist between you and my son, but we should hear both sides. Perhaps there's some sort of misunderstanding." City Master Xiao could be considered as being excessively polite, but how could Li Yunmiu not see the hint of killing intent which flashed through his eyes for a split second? "Haha, on the contrary, there's no misunderstanding." Li Yunmiu coldly smiled. At that moment, he wasn't paying the slightest bit of attention to him because he was nothing more than an ant in his eyes. "Since there's no misunderstanding, then release my son first, Dao friend, then we will speak." Because of being covered in dark energy for a long time, Xiaorong's eyes had begun to turn completely white. He was almost at his last breath, and City Master Xiao was very anxious about that. He only had one son. If he died in Li Yunmiu's hand, his bloodline would vanish. At the thought of it, his killing intent toward Li Yunmiu rose to another level. But Li Yunmiu didn't make any movements nor replied to his words. It made City Master Xiao even more anxious. "What exactly is the matter, Dao friend? Quickly release my son." He cannot hold on for much longer. Li Yunmu smiled then indifferently said, I never intended to let him off. When City Master Xiao saw Li Yunmu's attitude, he unleashed his strength, and the onlookers involuntarily gulped down their saliva. But why, Dao friend? There wasn't any hatred or grievances between you and me before this, and even if there were, what the hell does it have to do with my son? City Master Xiao became truly anxious because Xiao Rong's life was slowly slipping away, and he became unable to control his emotions. It became extremely difficult to breathe for the onlookers under the pressure emitted by City Master Xiao. Some of those with weak constitutions even knelt on the ground under the pressure. Haha, those people sacrificed by you also didn't have any hatred or grievance with you, but didn't you still use them to open the Yin Imperial Palace? Li Yunmu said indifferently. It was only because of their greed that they suffered such a fate. What's more, the world of cultivation is one where the strong prey on the weak. It doesn't matter if those without strength are sacrificed. At that moment, City Master Xiao's eyes turned completely red. If the next second Xiao Rong's breath completely disappeared, he would definitely charge forward and hack Li Yunmu into pieces. But Li Yunmu didn't pay the slightest attention to City Master Xiao's gaze. Instead, he said in a disdainful voice, by that logic, I am stronger than your son, so his death is also deserved. If Dao friend dares to do so, then I will definitely not let you leave this place. When City Master Xiao saw that Li Yunmu wasn't paying attention to him, his expression turned even darker, and he couldn't help but threaten him. When the surrounding people saw Li Yunmu's actions, they were shocked. They hadn't expected that this youth would surprisingly dare to threaten City Master Xiao. Did he not know that he was the peak existence in the Ryukyu small world? When Li Yunmu heard City Master Xiao's threats, his smile vanished and he became completely expressionless. The next second, he waved his large hand, and the dark energy wrapped around Xiao Rong shrank further. Bang! Xiao Rong, who was covered in black energy, was instantly turned into a pile of mincemeat, which splashed everywhere. Haha, I want to see whether you have the ability to keep me here, Li Yunmu said with an indifferent smile. The onlookers were completely astounded, and some of them instantly fled the place. They felt that the youth was a lunatic, for why else would he kill City Master Xiao's son? If City Master Xiao attacked, they would also be caught in the battle and might even lose their lives. City Master Xiao stared blankly at the pile of flesh. He hadn't expected that the son he loved dearly would surprisingly be turned into a pile of flesh in front of his eyes, that he would die without even a complete corpse. Chapter 982, Surging like a gathering Strom. City Master Xiao's eyes turned completely red. He hadn't expected that Li Yunmu would really dare to kill his son in front of his eyes. He said he would kill and immediately did so. How did he dare to really do it? The next instant, his right hand transformed into a claw with a thick stench of blood coming from it. The death of his son made him lose all reason. All he wanted at that moment was to kill the person in front of his eyes using the most painful method and then torture his spirit so he would suffer eternally. City Master Xiao exerted some force in his feet, and the place where he had been standing turned into powder. He shot toward Li Yunmu like an arrow. The air turned completely red because of City Master Xiao's presence. People could clearly sense his killing intent, but the air 10 feet around Li Yunmu didn't have the slightest change. City Master Xiao immediately unleashed his most powerful attack and charged toward Li Yunmu without the slightest change in his speed. The surrounding space began to distort because of his presence. Li Yunmu sensed the City Master Xiao's strength and sighed. City Master Xiao could be considered as a very powerful golden immortal, but he couldn't compare to those standing at the peak of the golden immortal realm. He was definitely more formidable than the majority of golden immortals, but that was it. City Master Xiao might be able to fight against some of the weaker Great Principal Golden Immortals for 100 moves, and it wouldn't be difficult for him to break through into the Great Principal Golden Immortal realm someday. If he had been a person of the origin world, he would be among the most terrifying existences. But he still wasn't worth anything in front of Li Yunmu. Li Yunmu was rejoicing that he had left the origin world to broaden his horizons. Because of it, he learned the difference between the strength of the origin world and the outside world. In the vast universe, the past him was no different from a frog at the bottom of the well. He had only entered a heavenly emperor's small world and a quasi-emperor's small world and had already seen many people with tyrannical talents. Who knew how much of the origin world would be required to compare with the two small worlds? Moreover, with all factions becoming restless in preparation for the so-called War of Gods, the origin world faced a great crisis. But this wasn't something which Li Yunmu could change right then, because the origin world could be considered among the least powerful worlds in the universe since it produced very few powerhouses. Its rules put a limit on the development of life forms, which he had begun to understand. The only way to remove the fetters was to escape the world and jump out from beneath the heaven and earth, then enter a more formidable new world which had a higher limit. By then, City Master Xiao had already arrived in front of Li Yunmu. His claw fiercely stretched forward with a blood-red light ball circling around it. Li Yunmu smiled. While in the Yin Imperial Palace, he had trained with Heavenly Emperor Ryukyu and could use his physical body to withstand this type of attack. But he didn't intend to do that. He had no intention of giving any opportunities to City Master Xiao because he had already stayed in the Ryukyu small world for a long time. Under the stupefied gaze of City Master Xiao, Li Yunmu grabbed his hand and ruthlessly tore it off. City Master Xiao fell on the ground with a panicked expression. He had never anticipated that the youth standing in front of him would turn out to be so formidable. He had used his most powerful attack, but it was easily dealt with by the youth. Moreover, he had to pay the price of his arm for the attempt. After realizing it, City Master Xiao's mind was in complete chaos. Who exactly was the person before him? What was stored in the Yin Imperial Palace for him to become like that? City Master Xiao crawled away while feeling deep terror. When faced with an opponent of this level, all thoughts of revenge had vanished from City Master Xiao's mind. Fleeing? Do you think I will let you go? Li Yunmu saw that City Master Xiao wanted to escape and coldly sneered. He used the dark energy once more. Under the City Master Xiao's astonished gaze, the dark energy spread as far as the eyes could see. It seemed to cover the entire heaven. Moments later, it charged toward him. Stop! How could City Master Xiao not know that the dark energy in front of him was the thing that had crushed his son to death? He looked at Li Yunmu to beg for his life, but Li Yunmu didn't pay any attention toward him. The dark cloud covered City Master Xiao's figure, and after Li Yunmu's left, it shook once and spat out a corpse. With that, Li Yunmu completed all that he aimed to do in the Ryukyu small world. It was a surprise even to him how long he had ended up staying in it. He also didn't expect that he would encounter his master Heavenly Emperor Ryukyu. Li Yunmu, who had come out from the Ryukyu small world, wasn't aware that the outside world had turned upside down in the meantime, and that the reason for it was him. After he entered the Ryukyu small world, the half-emperors didn't agree to retreat without finding him. They began to wantonly attack Azura city in order to force him out. Because of it, Azura had been forced to come out. It was not because he cared about the lives of ordinary citizens of Azura city, but because his Night Pearl small world was in the City Lord Mansion. At first, Azura hadn't intended to go against the half-emperors flying in the sky, but after returning to the City Lord's mansion and taking a trip to the Night Pearl small world, he was left completely infuriated. A loud roar echoed from the City Lord's mansion. That loud roar made the eyebrows of the half-emperors jump. They hadn't expected that such a powerhouse would be hiding in Azura city. After re-evaluating their position, they intended to leave, and as for Li Yunmu's matter, they could plan about it later. But Azura was completely infuriated, so how could he just let them go? He had placed many treasures in the Night Pearl small world like the ancient god's corpse and others, but his long-term plan had been completely ruined by Li Yunmu. The furious Azura released his anger on the half-emperors flying in the sky. He rushed out of the City Lord's mansion and saw them. He immediately unleashed his domain, the Azura domain. Within it, Azura transformed into a war god with 3 faces and 6 arms. Every face had a malevolent expression and each of the 6 arms was holding a weapon, but what left Yin Emperor and the others gobsmacked was the fact that all of the weapons were immortal. They tried to resolve their misunderstanding with Azura straight away, but why would the furious Azura listen? Thus, the curtain for the grand battle was lifted. Chapter 983, Furious Azura. Even in the outside world, the immortal weapons were rarely seen treasures. The appearance of one represented the birth of a powerhouse. An immortal weapon needed to experience countless battles to be born and absorb boundless spirit energy. Only then the first generation tool spirit would be born. However, the strength amplification provided by a weapon possessing tool spirit made the immortal weapon countless times more formidable. The unfortunate part was that immortal weapons left behind by previous generations might not be compatible with the new user's attribute. It meant that they might be somewhat inferior in respect to strength amplification, but they still weren't something that ordinary weapons could match. An ordinary cultivator might not possess a destined immortal weapon their whole life, but even ordinary immortal weapons weren't something that anyone could find. What left Yin Emperor and others astonished was that Azura had 6 weapons, and not only were all of them immortal weapons, 2 of them were emitting the same presence as Azura. He surprisingly possessed 2 destined immortal weapons. A heavenly emperor powerhouse wasn't something that a few half-emperors could fight. No one had expected, however, that not only was Azura a heavenly emperor, his strength was amplified by 2 immortal weapons. Flee. It was the only thought floating in the minds of the half-emperors in the sky. At that moment, Yin emperors and the others simply weren't on the same level as Azura. But how could Azura let them escape? Didn't he know who exactly they were? They had managed to bypass the restriction set by him and entered his small world without his notice. Moreover, what was even more disgusting was that not only his most important treasure in the small world, but even all the other materials required for his future plan had vanished. Even the residents of the small world with high potential had disappeared. He had spent countless precious treasures and resources to nurture the Night Pearl small world. He had also input a large amount of energy to turn the Night Pearl small world into a high-level small world. He had obtained a large amount of power of belief from it, but before he could enjoy it properly, all of it was stolen by a mysterious powerhouse. The most important thing was still the corpse of the ancient god, since it was the core of his plan. However, it had vanished together with everything else, and Azura couldn't continue with his plans. Previously, Azura didn't care about anything and had complete confidence in dealing with everything because he trusted his strength, his wisdom, and the plans he had made to succeed. But at that moment, he was like a person who had been slapped. The plan he believed to be perfect was surprisingly destroyed by an insignificant ant. Even when he failed in Lakshmi's destruction, he hadn't been that angry. Azura was filled with boundless anger at that moment, and the sky above Azura city, which was originally sunny, filled with black clouds as if it was going to collapse. When the residents of Azura city saw it, they were completely terrified. The black clouds contained a large amount of pressure, and every suppressed person's heart began to thump loudly. Almost every family of every household came outside of their homes and began to continuously kowtow toward the sky while praying. According to them, a god had been dispatched by heavens to punish them. When Yin Emperor and his group saw Azura unleashing his domain, they tried to retreat, but Azura waved his hand and his Azura domain expanded a few times to envelop all of them. At that moment, Yin Emperor and his group became aware that a battle couldn't be avoided. They were already captured in Azura's domain, and not only did Azura obtain extremely high strength amplification in his domain, its greatest strength was restriction. All the people inside the domain were restricted. Apart from the region inside the domain, they wouldn't be able to go anywhere else. This effect of domain was extremely suitable for Azura since he was extremely formidable in melee combat. His domain simply forced the enemy to have a battle with him. Unless Azura took the initiative to release his enemies or the enemy possessed the strength to suppress Azura, they wouldn't be able to leave. If anyone took the risk of trying to pass the edge of the domain, they would receive an attack whose strength was 3 times that of Azura. How formidable was Azura's attack! Let alone those half-emperors, even the majority of the heavenly emperors would be injured if they didn't die after receiving his attack when it was tripled in damage. All of that meant that Yin Emperor and his group weren't Azura's opponents. At that moment, they had reached a stage where they could neither advance nor retreat, so each and every one of them had a solemn expression. Azura didn't care about any of that. He had lost all reason because of Li Yunmu's actions and just wanted to vent out the anger filling his heart. Thus, he took the initiative to attack. He exerted force in his legs and shattered the space underneath him while his body turned into a blur that rushed toward Yin Emperor and the other. Wherever he passed, space shattered around him. Yin Emperor and his group, which had been guarding against Azura from the start, saw him attacking at that moment and also began to move. They kept gathering Shen energy on their hands, which they then turned into attacks aimed in Azura's direction. At the same time, they increased their speed to the peak. They flew back to pull open some distance from Azura. Azura's feet moved sidewards, avoiding the attacks. After that, he stabilized himself and began the chase again. The reason why Azura wasn't using flux energy to attack was because given the disparity between their strength, if Yin Emperor and the others were killed in a few attacks, how would he be able to vent the anger eating him alive? At that moment, Azura wanted to catch them and drive his weapons into their bodies as well as see the blood flowing out of them. Because of that, he gave Yin Emperors and others a chance to catch their breath, but their situation wasn't very optimistic. They were already close to the edge of the domain. At that moment, the effects of Azura's domain completely displayed themselves. Only a heavenly emperor powerhouse could congeal a domain. Quasi-emperors could endure the suppression of a domain, but that was it. Only a heavenly emperor wouldn't be suppressed, even if they would still be influenced by the ability of the domain. By then, Yin Emperor and the others had already retreated to the edge and were unable to withdraw anymore. Azura saw it and increased his speed as he flew toward Yin Emperor and the others. When Yin Emperor and his group saw their situation, they glanced at each other, and the 4 of them fled in different directions. They could only do one thing, and that was to make Azura use his energy completely. At that time, the domain would shatter by itself. But they didn't consider that Azura was using melee combat to fight against them, which didn't require a large amount of energy. They were going to die long before Azura's energy ran out. Chapter 984, Half-Emperor Instakilled. When Yin Emperor and the other 4 scattered, it actually made Azura pause for a moment. But he quickly reacted. He couldn't chase all of them at the same time, but it didn't matter whom he hunted down first. After realizing that, Azura immediately rushed toward Elder Ancestor Qingyuan, the Taoist half-emperor. When Elder Ancestor Qingyuan sensed the presence flying toward him, his expression immediately changed. He hadn't expected that his luck would be so bad that he would become Azura's first target. Elder Ancestor Qingyuan's will to survive was very strong. In a split second, he burst forth with peak speed surpassing his previous limits and surprisingly became equally matched with Azura in terms of speed for a moment. Azura creased his eyebrows. He hadn't expected that the little ants would turn out to be so troublesome. He had been forced to keep up the domain and had yet to catch even one of them. You all intend to humiliate me too. At that moment, Azura's face filled with fury, and he thought about the person who had infiltrated his small world. The sight of Elder Ancestor Qingyuan fleeing made Azura go crazy. He was holding a long spear in one of his arms, which was one of his 2 destined weapons, the Azura spear. He aimed the tip of the long spear toward the fleeing Elder Ancestor Qingyuan. The next instant, his arm holding the Azura spear was covered by devil patterns. Soon after, the long spear began to release dark light from its entire body. That light gradually congealed together and began to spiral around the tip. The next second, the spiraling black energy suddenly shot toward Elder Ancestor Qingyuan. It turned into a black bird, which left long tracks behind it in the sky. Elder Ancestor Qingyuan stopped and turned around. He wanted to fight back, but unfortunately for him, the Blackbird attack was Azura's consummate skill, so how could he stop it? Elder Ancestor Qing Yuan crossed his hands in front of his chest. When the attack got close to him, his expression turned grim. At that moment, he could clearly sense the might of the attack. But he knew that if he didn't defend himself, there would be only one outcome: his death. However, even if he knew it, so what? The black energy streaked across the sky. The enormous power contained in the attack even caused cracks to appear in surrounding space. Elder Ancestor Qing Yuan also sensed that the might of the attack was beyond him, but he was unable to escape it. He could only continue gathering all his Shen energy on his arms. Soon after, Elder Ancestor Qing Yuan threw his whisk in the sky. The Three Purities whisk was a supreme treasure of Taoist school left behind by the ancient guys. Although it wasn't an immortal treasure, it had experienced countless battles and was at the edge of becoming a quasi-immortal weapon. It was the biggest trump card that Qing Yuan had. He put all his hopes on the whisk. The Three Purities whisk transformed into a ray of light and hovered above Elder Ancestor Qing Yuan's head, where it formed a golden shield. Azura's attack slammed into the shield. A large explosion rang out, and the black energy surrounded the shield. Elder Ancestor Qing Yuan sensed the true might of the attack at that moment and was incredibly startled. Even the light emitted by the Three Purities whisk began to weaken. But the Elder Ancestor of Taoist school couldn't do anything other than to pour his Shen energy into the whisk. Soon though, his expression turned into one of despair. Cracks began to appear in the shield created by the whisk. They were constantly spreading and slowly filled the entire shield. Soon after, the shield was covered in crack. The whisk shattered and erupted in flames. They bombarded Elder Ancestor Qing Yuan's body. The black flame attempted to devour Elder Ancestor Qing Yuan. Soon, a muffled sound echoed, and Elder Ancestor Qing Yuan spat out a mouthful of blood before being sent flying away. He lost his consciousness, but fortunately for him, the whisk had resisted the majority of the attack. Otherwise, he would have perished right there and then. But his situation wasn't very optimistic. At that moment, his body was covered in wounds from which blood was pouring out constantly. With each moment that passed, his breath grew weaker. Azura was standing in the same place as before with a frown. He wasn't happy with what he saw. His most powerful attack hadn't been able to kill a single person. His figure flickered and rushed toward Elder Ancestor Qing Yuan. Before a moment passed, Azura arrived at Elder Ancestor Qing Yuan's side. Azura's four hands caught the four limbs of his target under the gazes of Yin Emperor and the others. Azura raised the body, and his two arms, one holding a sword and the other holding a spear, thrust their weapon into Elder Ancestor Qing Yuan's body. The sound of an explosion echoed, and Elder Ancestor Qing Yuan's body shattered and turned to ashes. The half-emperor of a generation had perished in the hands of Azura. At that moment, Azura's bloodthirsting gaze turned toward the remaining three half-emperors. The scene from just a moment ago had made him feel comfortable, and he wanted to use their blood to wash away his anger. When the three half-emperors saw that, they couldn't help but feel alarmed. They could see the killing intent in the eyes of the enemy and knew that if they separated at that moment, their outcome would be the same as that of Elder Ancestor Qing Yuan. He hadn't been the weakest among the four of them, but even he couldn't withstand a single one of Azura's attack. In the attempt, his school's most precious quasi-immortal treasure had actually shattered. The three quickly got close to each other and stood side by side so as to not give Azura any way to attack. They looked at Azura with nervous expressions and their guard raised. At that moment, large beads of sweat rolled down the forehead of Yin Emperor and the others, and their breath was ragged. But they didn't dare to relax their vigilance toward Azura in the slightest. When Azura saw the three half-emperors standing side by side, he wasn't bothered in the least. Due to the earlier fight, he had sensed the smell of blood, and it gave him pleasure. At that moment, Azura only wanted to continue forward and kill the remaining few people. His 6 arms were constantly brandishing their weapons and creating strange attacks one after another. Energy gathered around them. All the different attacks were filled with boundless might and could shatter the space around the 3 targets. The might of each of the 6 attacks was comparable to the attack against Elder Ancestor Qing Yuan. The eyes of Yin Emperor and his group narrowed. They could barely resist one attack, so there was nothing they could do against the 6 that rushed at them. While despairing about it, they sensed that the attacks didn't fall on their bodies. Confusion entered their faces, but they suddenly sensed an extremely familiar presence behind them. Chapter 985, Shen Chen becomes Emperor. Isn't this the presence of Buddhist half-emperor? Wait, no, although this presence is very similar to the presence of Buddhist half-emperor, it is much more powerful. It was that presence that had stopped Azura's attack. When the trio turned around to take a look, it was surprisingly Buddha clan's half-emperor. But based on the energy fluctuations coming from his body, he should be called Buddhist Heavenly Emperor. This, Dao brother Shen Chen, you advanced? Yin Emperor and the others asked in astonishment. They hadn't expected that the Buddhist half-emperor would unexpectedly take a step forward before them and enter the Heavenly Emperor realm. Previously, the Buddhist half-emperor wasn't the most formidable among them, so when they saw him appear before them with his present strength, they felt somewhat uncomfortable. When the Buddhist true son was under threat, the half-emperor had sent a clone containing his life essence, but to his surprise, the projection manifested using his life essence was destroyed by Li Yunmu's one attack. At that time, the Buddhist half-emperor had spat out a mouthful of blood and lost consciousness. The Buddhist true son was his favorite disciple, but he hadn't appeared with the other 4 half-emperors in the sky above Azura city to take vengeance. The Buddhist half-emperor had ended up injuring his meridians because of anger. The worry about Buddhist true son's situation interfered with him healing himself too. When the Heavenly Emperor of Buddha clan learned about this matter, he summoned the Buddhist half-emperor and had a night-long discussion with him. Only then the injuries of Buddhist half-emperor began to recuperate properly. Under the guidance of the Heavenly Emperor, the Buddhist half-emperor slowly comprehended that life and death are ruled by fate and hardships extend from heaven to earth. This allowed him to grasp a heavenly Dao and break through the quasi-emperor realm to become a heavenly emperor powerhouse. At the same time, he also comprehended the most powerful domain among all the heavenly emperor powerhouses of Buddha clan, life and death domain. Once it happened, the importance attached to Shen Chen by Buddhist clan reached the peak. They gave him the Buddha clan's supreme treasure of ancient times straight away. The Buddha clan's supreme treasure was passed down from generation to generation and inherited by the most powerful disciple of each generation. Those disciples then led the Buddha clan to glory. The supreme treasure was an immortal treasure, and it ranked at the front in the list of immortal treasures. It was the destined immortal weapon of first-generation Buddhist leader Fang Zhang. After he passed away, the immortal treasure remained in the Buddha clan, and because of it, each generation's Buddhist disciples cultivated the same cultivation method from ancient times, Great Sun Golden Scripture. It led to the compatibility between the supreme treasure and each generation's legacy disciple to be almost perfect. Truth be told though, the majority of sects were like that. When the supreme treasure of Buddha clan, blue dragon beads, appeared in Shen Chen's hands, it began to emit the might of a destined immortal weapon. When Azura saw that his attack had been neutralized, he began to frown. He sensed Shen Chen's strength and surprised. He hadn't expected that a heavenly emperor powerhouse would come. Who are you? Azura took the initiative to speak. He didn't know Shen Chen, but based on the opponent's strength, Shen Chen wasn't someone easy to deal with. Buddha clan, Shen Chen. Dao friend, I want to take these people away. I wonder if Dao friend can give some face to this poor monk. Shen Chen looked at Azura expressionlessly, without showing any sadness or joy. What a joke! These people came to my territory, destroyed my city, and you ask me to let them go? Am I that easy to bully? When Azura heard that Shen Chen surprisingly belonged to the Buddhist clan, he was quite startled. The Buddha clan was considered among the top powers. They had 2 heavenly emperor powerhouses, and with the addition of Shen Chen, they gained a 3rd heavenly emperor powerhouse. But Azura wasn't a timid person. When he saw Shen Chen's attitude of calmness toward everything, it made him extremely unhappy. His expression turned cold. Shen Chen had recently entered the Heavenly Emperor realm, yet he didn't even place Azura in his eyes. Haha, seems like S.H.A.D.O.W friend doesn't intend to give face to this old monk. Shen Chen's expression was still tranquil and he spoke without any expression. When Azura saw Shen Chen's lack of emotion, the fire in his heart became even stronger. The person who destroyed his heavenly world still hadn't been found, and the 4 half-emperors had actually destroyed Azura city. Before he was able to kill them, however, a Buddhist heavenly emperor appeared and said that he wanted to take the perpetrators with him. Rage exploded in Azura's heart. It was as if Mount Tai had collapsed and all his apprehensions had disappeared after the matters of the past few days. At that moment, he didn't care about the Buddha clan or Taoist school. All he wanted to do was one thing, and it was to keep the 3 half-emperors. Azura took a deep breath and unleashed his divine awareness. His Azura domain was instantly released completely, enveloping everyone with the smell of blood that spread through everywhere. It even turned the sky red. The half-emperors sensed the complete release of the domain and instantly felt suffocated. Large beads of sweat flowed down their foreheads. They half knelt on the ground and felt like their eyes were about to fall out. At that moment, the half-emperors didn't have the slightest strength to resist. It was the disparity between half-emperors and heavenly emperors. Just by relying on his domain, Azura was able to force these half-emperors to kneeling before him. What kind of thing are you? You actually dare to force me to give you face? Azura loudly roared toward Shen Chen. When Shen Chen heard him, he waved his hand and unleashed the life and death domain. Golden light replaced the black light and collided against the Azura domain with a powerful momentum. The instant the 2 domains collided, 2 completely opposite presences knocked against each other. In the end, the battle between the 2 domains ended with a tie. This left Azura extremely astonished. He had been a heavenly emperor for a long time while Shen Chen had only become a heavenly emperor recently. For some reason though, their domains were evenly matched. The 2 domains kept colliding, but neither of the 2 was able to expand even one step. Yin Emperor and the others obtained a chance to take a breath of air once they became part of Shen Chen's life and death domain. When Azura saw this, he knew that Shen Chen's domain was extremely formidable. The black runes began to spiral around his arms, which held a pike and a long sword. Azura's expression was ice-cold when he thrust the pike forward. A black firebird with an astonishing presence rushed toward Shen Chen. It left cracks in the space it passed. When Shen Chen saw that, he threw the blue dragon beads which began to spiral in the sky. Each bead was flickering with golden light, which turned into a long dragon that rushed toward the firebird. An astonishing explosion occurred. Shen Chen's golden dragon proved to be slightly inferior. After all, it hadn't been long since he had broken through the Heavenly Emperor realm and his cultivation base hadn't stabilized. Although his domain was evenly matched with that of Azura, he wasn't Azura's opponent once they began using Shen skills. Chapter 986, Purple Firmament Divine Thunder. When Yin Emperor and the others saw what had happened, their newly found confidence disappeared, and they became flustered. If Shen Chen was defeated, they also wouldn't be able to escape. Thus, the trio glanced at each other and unleashed their most powerful attacks. One after another, multicolored attacks joined the fight between Golden Dragon and Flame Bird. Because of the assistance of Yin Emperor and the others, the Golden Dragon, which had been in a disadvantageous position until then, roared loudly, and its battle with the Flame Bird reached a tie. When they fiercely collided with each other, a violent explosion occurred in the sky. The domains of the 2 people had to suffer the explosion at the same time. The domain of life and death flickered and then dissipated, which proved that Azura was more formidable. He was able to come out evenly matched when facing a heavenly emperor and 3 half-emperors. After the explosion, Shen Chen's group was forced to retreat. They coughed out a mouthful of blood. Azura's situation, however, wasn't great either. His complexion was pale like paper, and he ruthlessly stabbed the long pike into the ground to support himself. "Dao friend, this old monk really admires you, but unfortunately, even if this old monk cannot beat you, you also cannot kill the three of them. It would be better if you conceded slightly and let this old monk take them away." Shen Chen was completely astonished by Azura's tyrannical strength. From the fight earlier, it was clear that Azura was slightly more formidable than the old heavenly emperor of Buddha sect. Fortunately, Shen Chen had already stepped into the heavenly emperor realm, otherwise, let alone speak of protecting Yin Emperor's group, he himself would probably be unable to escape. At that moment, only a little amount of flux energy remained in Azura's body. If he tried to keep the group forcefully and the other party strongly resisted, he might get a permanent injury which would never heal. "Humph! The next time I see you is the day you die." Azura knew that he was unable to wipe out the enemy and coldly snorted before throwing a vicious line and coldly watching as Shen Chen led Yin Emperor's group out of Azura city. Soon after, Azura returned to the city lord's mansion. The pressure in the sky dissipated, and Azura city's citizens heaved a sigh of relief upon seeing it. They began to rejoice that heavenly god's punishment didn't descend. At that moment, Li Yunmu wasn't aware of this affair. How could he have expected that his actions would surprisingly lead to the birth of a new heavenly emperor in Buddha clan and that the people seeking revenge against him would engage in an astonishing battle with Azura? After Li Yunmu came out of Ryukyu's small world, he discovered that it had lost its previous grandeur. Yin Imperial Palace had been destroyed, and since it was the power source of Ryukyu's small world, its life faded. At that moment, Li Yunmu looked at the dull Ryukyu spirit bead in his hand. His master had ended up leaving the stage because of it. The first thing that Li Yunmu did after coming out was to congeal a wave of dark energy and ruthlessly attack the Ryukyu spirit bead. It sent out the yin energy remaining in the small world to resist. But right then, Li Yunmu could already be considered a powerful quasi-emperor, so it was very easy for him to subdue an immortal weapon which had lost its power source. The surface of the Ryukyu spirit bead filled with runes. When Li Yunmu waved his hand again, the Ryukyu spirit bead shattered with a bang and disappeared into the wind. Yin Emperor, who had just said farewell to Shen Chen and the others, was injured because of the damage to the immortal tool. He sensed that the injury inside his body wouldn't recover for a couple decades. Who did it? After destroying the Ryukyu spirit bead, Li Yunmu discovered that a black cloud had formed in the sky. An astonishing presence came from it, and lightning sparks were dancing all over it. "Haha, Heavenly Dao has finally appeared? I want to see what ability you have to make the people of the world feel so terrified of you." Li Yunmu looked at the black cloud in the sky and disdainfully laughed. "It's just Heavenly Dao and nothing more, what can it do?" At that moment, the powerful presence gathered in the sky reached the peak, and a purple firmament palace surprisingly appeared above the black clouds. It signified that the heavenly punishment was the most powerful heavenly punishment that appeared when someone tried to break through into heavenly emperor realm. Purple firmament divine thunder. A purple thunderbolt appeared with cracks in the sky. It had an astonishing presence which ripped apart the space and forced the birds and beasts to run away. All the cultivators in 150-kilometer radius could sense the terrifying pressure. Heavens, who is it that called such a formidable heavenly punishment onto himself? Is someone trying to become a sovereign? All the people who sensed the purple firmament divine thunder were terrified. They had never seen such a terrifying heavenly Dao. The first purple firmament divine thunderbolt fell on Li Yunmu's body without giving him much time to react, but he managed to congeal a black cloud to resist his enemy. When the purple firmament divine thunderbolt slammed against its target, the black cloud, which was almost translucent, was surprisingly able to resist the majority of the power of the thunderbolt before dissipating. When the remaining attack landed on Li Yunmu's body, it didn't leave any injuries. After all, Li Yunmu's physical body had been tempered by Heavenly Emperor Ryukyu. Purple thunder kept converging in the sky, and one after another, thunderbolts shot toward Li Yunmu. The might of each one was higher than the last. During the second wave of attacks, Li Yunmu's black cloud was unable to resist after first contact. It was completely wiped out by the purple firmament divine thunder. The thunderbolt suddenly broke through the black cloud and exploded on Li Yunmu's body. It was instantly covered with sparks which spread from toe to head with pitter-patter sounds. Because of the attack, Li Yunmu's clothes completely disappeared and his skin was charred. Blood started to seep out from his skin and cover him in crimson. Haha, Heavenly Dao, you are only so-so. If I don't die today, I will definitely step on you someday. Li Yunmu raised his head toward the sky and loudly roared. It was his Dao. The Heavenly Dao seemed to be angered. Below the Purple Thunder Palace, purple thunderbolts congealed to form a ball of lightning which was constantly expanding. Li Yunmu narrowed his eyes upon sensing its might. He couldn't look down on this attack. Soon after, that ball of lightning rushed toward Li Yunmu. He circulated the black cloud, but the ball of lightning was clearly one step higher than the purple thunder in terms of quality. The black cloud couldn't create any obstructions for the ball of lightning and was completely shattered by the pressure without even coming in contact with it. After that, Li Yunmu gathered the energy of his entire body in his hands, and flux energy wrapped around his fists. He ruthlessly punched toward the ball of lightning. Wherever his fist passed, cracks appeared in the space. Instantly, the ball of lightning exploded, devouring the area of 100 meters around Li Yunmu. Chapter 987, Tribulation. Once the dazzling light disappeared, Li Yunmu's figure reappeared. At that moment, his body had been burnt and his clothes had turned into ashes. He was covered in blood and all sorts of wounds. If Li Yunmu moved even slightly, all the injuries would open up and shoot out arrows of blood. Li Yunmu was gasping for breath. The ball of lightning had injured him heavily, but Li Yunmu was astonished to discover that the strength of his physical body had unexpectedly advanced because of the heavenly punishment. Moreover, the strength of his soul had improved too. When he came out of the Ryukyu small world, his body could already be considered among the most formidable in the immortal realm. Even some Emperor realm powerhouse might not have a physical body as powerful as him. Because of that, he hadn't expected that such a tyrannical body would surprisingly undergo another refining because of heavenly punishment. It was no wonder then that everyone under the Emperor realm was considered an ant. Heavenly punishment was like a cheat software. Its benefits toward the physical body and soul weren't something which an immortal powerhouse could obtain overnight. If Li Yunmu wasn't walking the path of defying heavens, then the heavenly punishment wouldn't be so strict and his injuries wouldn't be so heavy. But Li Yunmu didn't regret it. If he had been satisfied with living under the heavens, why would he live the painful life of a cultivator? Instead, he would have been much happier staying on earth and spending time with his parents. Since he planned to stand at the peak, then no one or nothing could stop him. Not even the gods of ancient times or the Heavenly Dao. Heavenly Dao. If I don't die today, then I will definitely step upon you. Li Yunmu faced the sky and spoke loudly with his eyes almost falling out of their sockets as well as the injuries on his body opening. He acted as if he didn't feel anything. At that moment, Li Yunmu was standing on the ground and experiencing the baptism of lightning. The ground was covered in cracks because of the attacks, and Li Yunmu was like a god of war, battling against the Heavenly Dao. Another ball of lightning landed on Li Yunmu's body, and he again spat out blood, but his figure didn't move in the slightest. Another one descended. By then, Li Yunmu had already experienced 12 waves of heavenly punishment. It was only half the total amount, for the appearance of Purple Firmament Palace was followed by 27 waves of heavenly punishment. It was the highest punishment unleashed by heavens on those who incurred its wrath. It attacked the body, soul, martial intent and martial Dao in order to destroy their body, extinguish their soul, wipe out their intent, and cut their Dao. Even among the powerhouses of ancient times, there had never been anyone who had been able to successfully transcend even the first 10 body-destroying waves of heavenly punishment. Those who dared to stand against Heavenly Dao were destroyed. It was the majesty of Heavenly Dao. Li Yunmyo clenched his teeth and continued enduring the tribulation. The purple firmament divine lightning filled his body with cracks and many of his internal organs had shattered, which left him in extreme pain. Until then, Li Yunmyo had successfully lived through 20 waves of heavenly punishment, but the next 7 wouldn't be like before. They would attack Li Yunmyo's Dao. If he was unable to withstand them, the foundation of his Dao would be destroyed and he would turn into a cripple. This was the final punishment of the Purple Firmament Palace toward the offender. When Li Yunmyo was inside the Yin Imperial Palace, Heavenly Emperor Ryukyu had told him about it, so Li Yunmyo knew that he couldn't be careless when facing the 7 waves of heavenly punishment. They were extremely terrifying, and so his gaze turned solemn. He fully unleashed his Dao intent and waited for the heavenly punishment to descend. The purple firmament divine thunder had been brewing in the clouds for a very long time when a slender black thunderbolt slowly descended. Li Yunmyo didn't dare to be careless in the slightest and unleashed his full strength to contend against the heavenly punishment. With the sound of an explosion, the heavenly punishment descended. Li Yunmyo's mind turned blank for a split second, but soon after he sobered up. The thunderbolt was still roaming around his body. He discovered that the seemingly gentle black thunderbolt was surprisingly devouring his Dao bit by bit. Li Yunmyo hurriedly rotated his Dao to fight against the heavenly punishment. You want to destroy my Dao foundation, then first destroy my body. Before my body is destroyed, my Dao won't be extinguished. After his furious roar, Li Yunmyo's Dao intent erupted and wiped out the black heavenly punishment in his body. Li Yunmyo was left heavily gasping for breath, but before even a moment had passed, another wave of heavenly punishment, stronger than the previous one, descended from the purple firmament divine palace. Before the heavenly punishment descended, Li Yunmyo sensed its might. Once it appeared, everyone present in 100 miles area could sense it. Many people with a weaker cultivation base were forced to kneel toward heaven because of the powerful might of the heavenly punishment. Li Yunmyo's knees turned soft because of the pressure. He was about to kneel, but he clenched his teeth and forced himself to remain standing. The sound of bone breaking could be vaguely heard coming from his legs. Want me to pay allegiance to you? You're not worthy. My Dao is to chop down the heaven and behead the earth. I either stand at the peak and step on the heavenly Dao, or I will die never to be born again. Once Li Yunmyo said those words, he cut off all paths of retreat for himself. If he was able to resist the heavenly punishment, then he would win. But just like he said, if he lost, he wouldn't be able to reincarnate. Li Yunmyo gathered his Dao intent on his fist and stomped on the ground. With a bang, the ground on which he was standing caved in by a few meters. Li Yunmyo was unexpectedly rushing forth to meet the heavenly punishment. His punch rushed out to resist the heavenly Dao. He had already prepared himself for death, and soon after, countless flickering thunderbolts covered his body. After the sparks disappeared, Li Yunmyo fell from the sky and slammed into the ground. The attack from just a moment ago had crippled his arm. He clenched his teeth and rose up to run forward again, since the next wave of heavenly punishment was descending. Li Yunmyo was struck down by it once more. Soon after, he stood up without much thinking and rushed forth. With the sound of explosion, his body slammed into the ground and left deep marks. At that moment, Li Yunmyo's consciousness had gotten dizzy. Damn it, only 3 waves of heavenly punishment remain. Am I really going to die here? I am not willing. Li Yunmyo bit his tongue to regain his consciousness and looked at the descending heavenly punishment. His pupils narrowed because at that moment 2 waves of black lightning were descending at the same time. Heavenly Dao seemed to have been really infuriated. It surprisingly disregarded all laws of heaven and sent 2 waves of heavenly lightning at the same time. Regardless of whatever Li Yunmyo did, he would be wiped out. Heavenly Dao had sensed Li Yunmyo's potential and was surprisingly afraid of him. Chapter 988, Divine Palace transforms into thunder. Li Yunmyo looked at the lightning of heavenly punishment descending on him and clenched his teeth. He unleashed his demonic transformation. His body was covered in black mist, and the injuries he had suffered until then were suppressed. Li Yunmu looked at the sky. He clenched his right hand while gazing at the two waves of heavenly punishment descending. When he moved the next instant, the ground under his feet shattered. Li Yunmu turned into a ray of light and ferociously charged toward the heavenly punishment. The instant they collided, heaven and earth changed. A powerful brilliance lit up the sky and blinded everyone watching the fight. When the light dissipated, Li Yunmu floated down from the sky. He had lost a hand in the collision a moment ago. It had turned into ashes, but Li Yunmu's expression was one of pride. He wasn't the least bit bothered by the loss of his arm. At that moment, Li Yunmu had already transcended 26 waves of heavenly tribulation. Once he lived through the remaining ones, he could shed off the immortal realm and become an emperor. But Li Yunmu's condition was extremely bad. His flux energy was at the point of dissipating. Fortunately, his Dao intent had become even more imposing. After being baptized by heavenly punishment, Li Yunmu's Dao of only I had been further strengthened. But how could heavenly Dao allow a heaven-defying person to escape tribulation so easily? The final wave of heavenly punishment began brewing, and it was completely different from the previous 26 waves. This final heavenly tribulation was formed from the transformation of the purple lightning palace. At that moment, it turned faint and changed into a purple maelstrom. Li Yunmu looked at the lightning tribulation maelstrom in the sky. He could sense an irresistible might coming from it, but he had no way to retreat at that moment. In the meantime, Yin Emperor, who was filled with boundless fury, was rushing in the direction of the Ryukyu spirit bead. He had never thought that when he went to avenge his son, he would almost lose his life. Fortunately, at the most critical moment, Shen Chen broke through to Heavenly Emperor realm and saved his life. This, however, didn't change the hatred that Yin Emperor had for Azura. But what made him feel the most indignant was that some unknown person had used the opportunity of him leaving for Azura city to enter his small world and destroy the Ryukyu spirit bead. Right then, he could barely sense the feeble presence of Ryukyu spirit bead. The main problem, however, was that if Yin Emperor only relied upon absorbing Shen energy, his cultivation would be extremely slow. He had relied on slowly advancing with the power of belief supplied by the residents of the small world, but his small world had been destroyed by someone, which meant that his path of future cultivation had also been cut down. Yin Emperor was extremely furious because of that. Although he didn't know who had entered his small world, that person shouldn't be a simple character based on the fact that they were able to bypass all the restrictions. However, they also shouldn't be very strong because when all was said and done, the Ryukyu spirit bead was a treasure from ancient times. It was not extremely hard to destroy because the restrictions it contained had been damaged over time. The person who had entered the small world was definitely in the immortal realm. Yin Emperor wanted to find them and kill them before seeing whether he could repair the Ryukyu spirit bead. When Yin Emperor had traveled half the way, he suddenly sensed a terrifying presence in the sky. This is a tribulation cloud. Who exactly is this person that could attract such a terrifying tribulation? Yin Emperor mumbled. After seeing the tribulation cloud in the sky, he couldn't help but have an impulse to kowtow and pay allegiance. But could it be that the person facing the tribulation is the person who destroyed my small world? Was it possible that the stranger had obtained some sort of lucky opportunity in the small world? It was a fact that the Ryukyu spirit bead was Yin Devil Sovereign's treasure. Yin Emperor had obtained it in ancient ruins. When he discovered the treasure, a small world had already formed in the Ryukyu spirit bead, so he nourished it for several years and spent countless resources for life to blossom inside it. But when he entered the small world, he discovered that he couldn't enter many of the historical remains because he had already passed the immortal realm and had become a quasi-emperor. Although Ryukyu spirit bead was in his possession, it wasn't his destined immortal weapon and a remnant of Yin Devil Sovereign's soul was still present in the Ryukyu spirit bead. It made Yin Emperor unable to fully control the Ryukyu spirit bead and the reason why he wasn't able to take it when he went to hunt Li Yunmu. Because of this reason, his heart was filled with fury. The opportunity to become an emperor belonged to him, but it was snatched away by someone. Yin Emperor accelerated and rushed in Li Yunmu's direction. When Yin Emperor reached him, he was astonished to see Li Yunmu. Soon after, his expression turned incredibly gloomy. The person who destroyed his small world, wasn't he the same person who killed his 2 sons? I was wondering who it was, but it turned out to be S.H.A.D.O. friend. You S.H.A.D.O. friend are somewhat unreasonable, making us search for you for so long while you ran to destroy my small world. S.H.A.D.O. friend, don't you owe me an explanation? At that moment, Yin Emperor's expression was extremely sinister. He hadn't expected that the murderer of his sons whom he had been searching for so long would actually come to destroy his small world too. It made him wonder how exactly he had offended this person. When Li Yunmu saw Yin Emperor rushing over, he realized that the situation had taken a turn for the worse. He had intended to leave the region once he came out of the Ryukyu small world. But he hadn't expected that just as he came out, the heavenly tribulation would immediately sense him. Right then, Li Yunmu's situation was extremely bad. The flux energy in his body was emptied out and his body was covered in injuries. If Yin Emperor tried to kick him when he was down, Li Yunmu didn't know whether he could safely transcend his tribulation. After all, even if Yin Emperor did not get involved and just waited until he transcended the tribulation to deal with him, it would still be extremely difficult for him to escape. While Li Yunmu was stressing over what he should do, the heavenly punishment from the Purple Lightning Palace arrived, and Li Yunmu could no longer pay attention to Yin Emperor. When Li Yunmu looked at the descending heavenly lightning, his expression turned incredibly solemn. The heavenly lightning was extremely formidable. Even if Li Yunmu was in his peak state, he might not be able to stop it, let alone now when he had already taken 26 waves of heavenly punishment. Li Yunmu gritted his teeth. He had to resist the heavenly lightning no matter what. He had many matters left and could not die just yet. Within a split second, Li Yunmu decided that even if he had to degenerate into a devil, he had to resist the heavenly lightning, so he unleashed the devil transformation once more. Devil energy covered his body from head to toe. Black devil runes filled his body. The second devil transformation was unexpectedly more terrifying than the first one. Chapter 989, Yin Emperor perishes. Li Yunmu's body was filled with devil energy, and purple devil patterns were constantly flickering on his body. At that moment, he had fully turned into a devil. The reason why Li Yunmu didn't dare to use the devil energy freely was because every time he turned into a devil, he fell even deeper into the devil path. But when all was said and done, the devil transformation still gave him benefits. In a moment, his injuries recovered under devil energy's influence. Even his hand, which had been destroyed, regrew. Yin Emperor, who watched him from the other side, didn't know what sort of method Li Yunmu had used to pull something like that. He had planned to watch Li Yunmu die under heavenly punishment. And if the youth didn't die, then Yin Emperor would supply the last attack. But he didn't expect that Li Yunmu would surprisingly recover all of a sudden, which made Yin Emperor extremely furious. He could no longer continue watching Li Yunmu, who was emitting devil energy, without doing anything. Li Yunmu, who had undergone the devil transformation, made him feel dread. Yin Emperor had never imagined that this person standing in front of him was surprisingly hiding his strength, which was evenly matched with heavenly S.H.A.D.O. After seeing that, the resolve in Yin Emperor's heart became even stronger. He couldn't allow Li Yunmu to survive. If he transcended the tribulation, no one would be his opponent then. Thus, Yin Emperor formed an attack in his hand and threw it toward Li Yunmu. It was blocked by the devil energy surrounding Li Yunmu, which stunned Yin Emperor. The heavenly punishment was about to descend, and Yin Emperor knew that if he didn't do anything, Li Yunmu would most probably advance. Yin Emperor clenched his teeth and took out his long sword before rushing toward Li Yunmu. The sword was pointed at Li Yunmu's back as he congealed his most powerful attack. But Li Yunmu was on guard against Yin Emperor. He hadn't expected that Yin Emperor would charge at him, but it was a pleasant surprise. Li Yunmu used his body to forcefully block Yin Emperor's attack instead of evading or dodging it. Yin Emperor was overjoyed by the sight of it, but the next instant, his expression changed. His long sword did not cut Li Yunmu's skin. Instead, it shattered into pieces. When Yin Emperor got close, a faint smile appeared on Li Yunmu's face. His body had been tempered for a long time, so how could an attack from Yin Emperor hurt him? Have you come to help me transcend this tribulation? It seems like you are a really good person. Li Yunmu looked at Yin Emperor with a sinister smile before grabbing the man in a tight embrace. What are you doing? Damn it! Quickly, let go of me. Yin Emperor sensed the heavenly punishment slowly descending above them and felt terrified. Li Yunmu's heavenly punishment wasn't something that his frail body could take. But regardless of how much Yin Emperor struggled, he wasn't able to escape Li Yunmu's hold. Li Yunmu was firmly holding him while waiting for the heavenly punishment. Soon after, the two of them came in contact with the heavenly punishment. With the sound of an explosion, the sky which had turned dark was again illuminated as if it was day. At that moment, Li Yunmu was amazed to discover that the devil energy in his body was slowly scattering while resisting the heavenly punishment. It has to be known that the lightning was extremely pure, so the two cancelled each other out. Fortunately, Li Yunmu had pulled Yin Emperor to face the tribulation together with him, otherwise, he would have been turned into ashes long ago, let alone the heavenly punishment helping him cancel out the devil energy. Yin Emperor, whom he held in a tight hug, helped him by receiving a part of the heavenly punishment's might. Because of it, the strength of the devil energy and heavenly punishment were equally matched. At that moment, Yin Emperor had already lost consciousness. He didn't have a tyrannical body like Li Yunmu's, so his body was already on the verge of breaking apart. He slowly turned black. Li Yunmu looked at Yin Emperor and then stopped paying attention. At that moment, the devil energy in his body had been completely wiped out. He could be considered to have returned to his peak state, but at a price. The devil transformation and demonic transformation had completely vanished, becoming unusable forever. But Li Yunmu wasn't worried about it. The only thing he was worried about was that although the energy of the heavenly punishment had almost been used up, the remaining energy may still be something that he could not resist. Yin Emperor turned into ashes at that moment, while Li Yunmu had to confront the remaining heavenly punishment. His presence reached the peak then. Come! The full energy of heavenly punishment descended on Li Yunmu's body. In a split second, his face turned pale like paper, and the chaotic lightning energy began to destroy his internal organs. Li Yunmu sensed that he was unable to resist it. In the moment of desperation, he sacrificed several of his shadows to fight against it. When the final explosion occurred, Li Yunmu had sacrificed all his shadows to form the final attack. The enormous energies collided and terrifying shockwaves spread everywhere. When the light scattered, Li Yunmu's body was heavily injured. At that moment, his condition was extremely bad. Even his breath was fluctuating between existing and not. Li Yunmu was lying in the crater created by the last attack. He could be considered to have transcended the heavenly punishment, and a seven-colored cloud appeared in the sky. It was something that showed up whenever a person successfully stepped into the Emperor realm. It conducted the final baptism of the person who passed the tribulation. A ray of light fell on Li Yunmu's body from the cloud. Although he was a blade that would defy the heavens, the rules of heaven could not be changed. Although the heavenly S.H.A.D.O.W desired to wipe Li Yunmu out, it was unable to do it. It still had to send out the seven-colored cloud to baptize and turn him into an emperor. When the light beam fell on Li Yunmu's body, his injuries began to heal at a rate visible to the naked eye. Once it was done, his body became as good as before. After Li Yunmu recovered, he quickly stood up. He sat down cross-legged and began to absorb the baptizing energy descending from the seven-colored cloud. Every emperor had to do that. The stronger their heavenly punishment, the more baptizing energy they would receive. At that moment, the baptism received by Li Yunmu was several times more formidable than that of Shen Chen. Due to the baptizing energy, not only did all his injuries recover, even his flux energy became completely different. An ordinary heavenly emperor could easily take several years to complete this process. The Li Yunmu at that moment was completely different from before. If Yin Emperor appeared in front of him then, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he would be killed with one punch. Li Yunmu stood up, took a deep breath, and sensed the energy in his body. This was the Heavenly Emperor realm.